Story 1. The McDonald's Tunnels. I hadn't thought about that McDonald's in years. Not properly, anyway. It had stopped being a real memory a long time ago and turned instead into something more like a feeling. Warm yellow light, plastic booths bolted to the floor, fries in a red carton, the hiss of the soda machine, the steady murmur of adults talking over one another while rain taps softly against the windows. It was the kind of place that feels permanent when you're a child, even though most of them disappear without you ever noticing. The only reason I remembered it at all was because of an article. I was half awake on the couch, scrolling without really reading, when a local news headline caught my attention. A small photo sat above the text, a badly cropped school picture of a boy with a crooked smile and one front tooth missing. The article said he had gone missing from a McDonald's indoor playground. I almost kept scrolling, but a line farther down stopped me cold. A witness had seen him crawl into the back section of the play structure. I sat up immediately because I knew exactly what that meant. When I was a kid, there was a McDonald's near where we lived that had one of those indoor playgrounds. Bright red and yellow tunnels, foggy little plastic windows, a rope bridge that swayed too much when older kids ran across it, and a ball pit that smelled faintly of rubber and something sweet. From the outside, it probably looked small, but from inside, it felt enormous. The sound changed once you crawled into it. The restaurant noise became dull and distant. Your own breathing came back at you from the walls, and it felt as though you had stepped somewhere slightly removed from the rest of the world. There was one part of it, though, that always felt different. You couldn't see it clearly from outside. It was tucked farther back than the rest, hidden behind two tight bends and a hanging flap, where the light never seemed to reach properly. No one ever told us not to go there. There were no signs, no staff blocking it off, or nothing that should have made it feel forbidden. But kids avoided it anyway, not in a dramatic way, just instinctively, drifting around it as though we all understood something without ever saying it aloud. Even then, I knew what it felt like. It felt like stepping into a room where someone had been sitting quietly in the dark before you arrived. Most of the time, when I looked down that stretch of tunnel, there was nothing there. But sometimes I would catch movement. Just a shift ahead. Something low to the ground, disappearing around the bend. I always assumed it was another child, because that was the only explanation that made sense. The part that unsettled me wasn't the movement itself. It was that I never seemed to see anyone come back out. Children notice things like that. Maybe not in a fully rational way, but we keep count. We notice who goes in and who comes out. And sometimes, in that part of the tunnels, the count didn't seem to match. The memory that came back most clearly after reading the article was from a rainy evening. My parents had taken me there for dinner, and I remember my mother shaking out her umbrella by the entrance, while my father found a table with a tray. They told me I could go play while they waited for the food, and I ran straight into the structure in my socks because my shoes were wet. At first, it was exactly as loud and chaotic as always. Kids laughing, shouting, thudding past each other in the tunnels. But after a while, the noise began to thin out. Parents were calling children back. One by one, they left, until the whole structure seemed to empty around me without my fully noticing. I remember a girl crawling past me quickly, eyes down, And then two boys who had been ahead of me suddenly turned and pushed back the other way, with the hurried look of kids who have remembered they no longer want to be somewhere. Then it was quiet, not silent exactly. I could still hear the restaurant somewhere outside, but it sounded far away, muffled by plastic and distance. Ahead of me, in the darker part of the tunnels, something moved. At first I thought it was just another kid. I crawled forward, one bend, then another, feeling the warm plastic under my hands, hearing the static crackle softly against my sleeves. The tunnel dipped a little as it led into the back section, which turned out to be smaller than I remembered, just a dim, square space with no slide, no bright panels, nothing that would have given any child a reason to stay there longer than a second. And it was empty. I stopped there, confused, listening. Then I felt it. The sensation came all at once, and completely. An absolute certainty that I was no longer alone. It wasn't behind me or beside me. It was in front of me, somewhere in that darkness, hidden and waiting in the same way you can sometimes feel someone's presence in a room before you actually see them. I should have left immediately. I think part of me knew that, but I didn't. I stayed still, and after a moment, I heard movement again, closer this time. "Hello," I whispered. Nothing answered. Then something shifted forward. I never saw it clearly, and that's still the part that unsettles me most. I remember only the outline of a shape, low to the ground, moving with terrible slowness, as if it already knew I was there, and wasn't in any hurry at all. For 1 second, I froze. Then I turned and scrambled backward as fast as I could, slipping against the plastic, hitting the walls with my elbows and knees, my breath coming so fast it hurt. Behind me, I heard it move too. Suddenly quick now, the sound of it rushing after me through the tunnel. Then, all at once, the world opened back up. Light flooded in through the plastic windows. The restaurant noise crashed over me. I half fell out onto the padded floor, dizzy and shaking, while everything outside looked completely normal. People were eating. Parents were talking. My own parents sat at the table, exactly where I had left them, as if nothing at all had happened. I never told them what I'd seen. After that, I still played in the structure from time to time, but never beyond the second bend. Eventually, I forgot why. Until tonight. When I look back at the article, there was one line near the bottom that I hadn't noticed the first time through. Another child playing nearby had told police he thought he heard someone calling from the dark part at the back. I stared at that sentence for a long time, because I knew exactly what it meant. I don't know what was in that place. I don't know what I almost saw. But I can't stop thinking about that boy, about how small the tunnels for us must have felt around him, and how easy it would have been to mistake that first movement for another kid. How easy it would have been to pause, to listen, to wait just a second too long. Story 2. We were always 25 in my class, until one day we weren't. I remember exactly how many we were, not approximately, and not as a vague impression, but with the kind of quiet certainty that comes from something being repeated over and over again. We were 25. It mattered in small, annoying ways. Group work was always uneven. Someone was always left without a partner. And sometimes that someone was me. It became part of the shape of the class. Something you didn't question because it was always there. 25 wasn't just a number. It was how the group felt. Nothing changed without it being obvious. One day, we went on a class trip to an indoor swimming pool, the kind with tiled floors, humid air, and that sharp chlorine smell that clings to your throat. I don't remember why we went, only that our teacher counted us before we got on the bus, the same way she always did. 23, 24, 25. Everyone's here. That part I remember clearly. The day itself wasn't special. Nothing happened that stood out. No accidents. No sudden disappearances. Nothing that marked the moment as important. We swam. We shouted. We waited our turn for the diving board. And the noise echoed endlessly against the walls. If something fell off, I didn't notice it then. Or maybe I chose not to. Looking back, the only thing I can point to is a faint, passing feeling that the group seemed larger than usual. Not in a way that made me stop and count. Just a subtle sense, like hearing one voice too many in a crowded room without being able to isolate it. When it was time to leave, we gathered near the lockers, water dripping onto the floor, and our teacher stood by the exit to count us again. It was routine, automatic. 23, 24, 25. She paused. Then, almost quietly, 26. No panic, no raised voice. Just a moment of hesitation. She counted again, slower this time, and reached the same number. Someone laughed. Someone made a joke about an extra kid sneaking in. But that wasn't the part that felt wrong. What felt wrong was the silence that followed her question. Did someone join us? No one answered. We all looked at each other. Really looked. In that rare way, where you're trying to find something that should be obvious. But there was nothing. No unfamiliar face. No one standing slightly apart. No one who didn't belong. Everyone was exactly where they should be. I tried counting in my head, quietly, following each person with my eyes. 1, 2, 3. I got to 26, and did it again. Same result. And still, I couldn't find the extra person. It wasn't that there was one too many. It was that the number was wrong, without anything in it being wrong. After a moment, the teacher let it go and waved us toward the exit. We got on the bus, and everything returned to normal. The noise, the arguing over seats, the familiar chaos. No one talked about it again. Neither did I. The next day, we were back in the classroom, in the same seats, with the same names being called. If anyone had asked me how many we were, I would have said 25 without hesitation. It still felt true. It always felt true. And that's what unsettles me now. Because when I try to go back through it as an adult, faces, names, memories, I can still picture almost all of them. Where they sat, who they spoke to, how they moved through the room. And every time I count, I get the same result. 26. I don't recognize an extra person. I don't remember anyone joining. I don't remember anyone leaving. And the worst part is, nothing feels out of place. They all belong there. Every single one of them. Story 3. I heard my mum call me downstairs, but she was out of state. This didn't happen to me, but to one of my closest friends when we were around 15, and the way he told it has stayed with me ever since. Not just because of what happened, but because of the one small detail that made all the difference. It was a long weekend, the kind where everything feels quieter than usual, and he had the house to himself while his parents were out of state visiting family. At that age, it felt like freedom. No rules, no one checking in, just an empty house, and too much time to fill. That Saturday night, sometime around 7 or 8, he was upstairs in his bedroom, lying on his bed with the door half open, doing nothing in particular, just scrolling on his phone and enjoying the quiet. Then he heard his mum call him from downstairs. Clear as day. Dinner's ready. At first, he didn't even react properly, because it sounded normal, exactly like it always did. Same tone, same volume, same slightly tired way she said it. But then his brain caught up. She wasn't supposed to be home, so he leaned out into the hallway, frowning, and called back down. "Mum, are you home already?" There was a pause after that. The house stayed completely still, and for a second, he thought maybe he'd imagined it. So he leaned toward the doorway and called out, "Mum." Then, after a few seconds, he saw her. She stepped slowly into view from the direction of the kitchen, just at the bottom of the stairs, exactly where she always would be, and looked straight up at him. Everything about her seemed right. The way she stood, the way she held herself, even the clothes she was wearing looked like something she'd normally wear at home. She met his eyes, and she smiled. That was all. She didn't answer him. She didn't say hi, didn't explain why she was home early, didn't react to the fact that he'd just called out to her. She just stood there, smiling up at him. Then she turned, without breaking the calmness of it, and walked back into the kitchen. He stayed where he was, frozen in the doorway, trying to process what he'd just seen. And then he heard her again, from the kitchen. "Dinner's ready." He told me that the only reason he didn't just walk down those stairs to see what was going on, why she was home so early, was because of that one thing that didn't sit right. She hadn't spoken or said a single word when she appeared at the end of the stairwell. Why had she just smiled at him and then walked away? He could hear her, and he could see her, both completely clearly, but never at the same time. And something about that, something small and almost easy to ignore, stopped him completely. Instead of going downstairs, he backed slowly into his room, shut the door, and locked it. He called his mum's phone almost immediately. She picked up right away, still out of state, still hundreds of miles away, nowhere near home. They called the police after that, convinced there had to be someone inside the house, some kind of explanation that made sense. The officers checked everything, doors, windows, the alarm system, but nothing was out of place. No signs of entry, no one hiding inside. They told him it was probably his imagination, that maybe he'd been tired or half asleep. But he didn't sleep that night. He stayed in his room with the lights on until morning. And after that, he never stayed alone in that house again. The part that always stuck with me wasn't just the voice, or even the fact that he saw her standing there. It was that small detail. Because if she had just spoken, if he had seen her actually say the words he was hearing, he would have gone downstairs. And whatever was waiting there knew that. It got everything right, except for that one thing. Story 4. Inspired by... I worked at an amusement park in the 80s and saw some disturbing things by user 10-minute horror on Reddit. When people ask what Thriller World was like, I usually tell them the harmless things first. I tell them about the smell of sunscreen and fryer oil drifting together in the July heat, about the faded pop songs playing through the speakers near the arcade stalls, about the mountain air turning cold the second the sun slipped behind the ridge, even in August, about the staff passes hanging from our necks, and the way we thought they made us look older than we were. I tell them about the park at dusk, when the lights came on one by one, and everything glowed golden in pink and soft blue. From a distance, it looked beautiful, like the kind of place you'd beg your parents to take you when you were little. And it was beautiful in its way. That's part of why people stayed longer than they should have. The place sat at the foot of the Tremblay Mountains, on land that had been owned by the Phelps family for generations. Before the ski hill, before the rides, before the wave pool and the river rapids and the haunted house, there had been a coal mine there. It had run deep into the mountain for decades before it was shut down sometime in the 50s. The story we were given was simple. The mine closed. The family reinvented the land, and by the early 80s, they'd found a way to make money from it year-round. Winter gave them skiing. Summer gave them Thriller World. It was still a fairly new park when I worked there. I was 17 my first summer, hired as a lifeguard because I had decent reflexes, strong shoulders, and no better plan. I needed the money. College was coming. My mother wanted me to do something practical with my life, and my father thought a summer job would toughen me up. Maybe it did. The park had everything people wanted back then. Big rides, a lazy river that wasn't lazy at all, water slides built into the lower edge of the mountain, a wave pool so strong it could knock the breath out of grown men, a fast Ferris wheel, a spinning ride that made people throw up into the flower beds, a zip line that crossed nearly the whole park. And up on the mountain itself, the attraction everyone talked about, Thrill Racer. It was a gravity cart ride from near the summit down to the base. You climbed into a little open car with thin brakes and a steering bar that felt more symbolic than useful, then took off down a zigzag path cut into the slope. The whole ride lasted under 3 minutes. If you did it right, it felt like flying. If you didn't, there were guardrails in some places. Not in all of them. The first time I saw the park before opening hours, I thought it looked almost sweet. All those bright colours, waiting in the blue morning. The striped umbrellas still folded. The concession signs unlit. The carousel horses standing motionless in rows like something in a forgotten dream. It was easy, in the mornings, to imagine the place as harmless. By noon, it never felt that way. There were rules for every attraction, and the older staff liked to say, the rules were the only thing standing between a good summer and a funeral. Most of the time, they said it with a laugh. That was how people talked there. They joked about danger, so they didn't have to sit with it. A few days into my first week, one of the veteran lifeguards, Davis, leaned back in his chair near the wave pool and said, "You'll hear people call this place Killer World." I glanced over at him. "That's supposed to make me feel better." "Actually, yeah," he said. "Means nobody's pretending." That was Davis. 19, maybe 20. Blonde hair, burnt almost white by the sun, permanently shirtless if management wasn't looking, and the kind of confidence only certain boys have at that age, when they still believe the world recognizes their special arrangement with it. He showed me how to spot panic before the splashing started, how to keep my whistle in my mouth while diving, How to pull a kid to the side without making their terrified father feel useless. He knew every blind spot in the wave pool and every stretch of the rapids where the current grabbed harder than it should. He also knew every story. A broken arm at the Ferris wheel the summer before. A man who cracked his jaw on the tube slide. A teenager who passed out in the heat and wandered behind the maintenance sheds. People call them accidents, Davis said once, shading his eyes as he looked over the water. Most of them are. Still feels like the place likes keeping score. I laughed because I thought he was trying to scare me. He didn't laugh back. That first summer had a strange rhythm to it. Ordinary days broken by moments that lingered too long. A child vanishing beneath the waveline and reappearing coughing in my arms. A power flicker that shut down half the park for 2 full minutes. Long enough for the music to cut out and the place to fall into this unnatural hush. The zip line getting stuck over the center of the midway, while a woman screamed down at everyone below. And sometimes there were smaller things that made no sense at all. People would come out of the haunted house looking pale and quiet, like they'd forgotten where they were for a second. Kids cried near the old service road behind the mountain and said they heard someone underground. Once, while doing closing rounds with another lifeguard named Molly, I saw every light on the far side of the park blink out in a perfect line, one after another, moving toward us like something traveling in the dark. Then they came back on all at once. Molly stopped walking. I remember that clearly because she was never the type to stop. She kept moving through everything, usually with one hand on her ponytail and the other holding a cup of melted soft serve. "What?" I asked. She looked toward the mountain. "Nothing," she said too quickly. "Just hate this place after closing." She was dating Davis then. Everybody knew it, though they kept pretending they were discreet. He'd wait for her by the employee lockers. She'd steal his fries on break. On slower afternoons, they'd sit on the rail behind the first aid hut and talk in low voices while the rest of us sweated through our uniforms. It should have been the kind of summer I look back on fondly. Parts of it even are. That's what's strange. Memory smooths things. Even bad places can glow in retrospect if the weather was right. The night Davis died, there was a staff party at the base of Thrill Racer. It wasn't official. Nothing at Thriller World ever was. But some of the operations crew had smuggled out beers, and one of the girls from the game section had brought a portable radio. Someone said they wanted to race the mountain after hours. Someone else said management would kill us. Then everyone laughed because management was nowhere nearby, and because being young feels for a little while like standing outside consequence. There were 8 racers total. Davis was one of them. I can still see the red flare tied to the back of his cart, hissing in the dark. I can still hear Kara's voice from higher up the slope, calling out the countdown. We all stood at the bottom, craning our necks toward the mountain road, waiting for those small red streaks to begin moving. When they did, it looked beautiful. 8 lights cutting through the black switchbacks, fast and wild, vanishing and returning around the bends. Everybody yelled. Somebody grabbed my arm, and then one of the lights pulled too far ahead. There was a turn halfway down that all the staff knew to respect. In daylight, it looked easy. At night, there was a sharp edge in the mountain, nothing more. The lead cart hit that turn and vanished. There was a sound first, metal, stone. Then the flare flew off us into the dark and spun through the air like a fallen star. By the time we reached him, no one was speaking. The others stood in a ring on the hillside. One of the maintenance boys had both hands on his head. Molly pushed past everyone and dropped to her knees beside Davis. I won't describe what was left in detail. I don't need to. The image was enough to follow me for years. What I remember most is the stillness after. The mountain seemed to go silent with us. Even the radio at the bottom had gone quiet. Or maybe someone turned it off. Either way, I became aware of the wind moving through the tall grass, and of how dark the tree line looked beyond the track. Davis had been laughing not 5 minutes earlier. Now Molly was making a sound I'd never heard from a person before. The investigation blamed speed. Maybe they were right. There were no skid marks. The brakes on the cart couldn't be checked properly afterward. It became one of those stories people settled too quickly, because the alternative is harder to live with. By Tuesday, the park was open again. That was the rule there. Whatever happened, the music came back on. The gates opened. People lined up with sun hats and strollers and coupons in their hands. Molly never returned. I finished the summer in a blur of headaches and chlorine, and a quiet dread I kept trying to mistake for exhaustion. At night, I started drinking with some of the older staff, because sleep felt difficult without it. The park followed me home. I'd hear the wave machine in the dark. I'd dream about empty rides still moving. When September came, I left for school and told myself I was done with Thriller World forever. Then spring arrived. I needed money again. That's the embarrassing part of the story, maybe. That I went back. I came back because there weren't many jobs in town, because the pay was better than grocery work, because returning staff got priority, because 17 turns into 18, and you start believing you were dramatic the year before. The park looked different when I saw it again in May. Not worse, just altered. They'd painted some of the railings, added new signs, repaired one of the slides. But the biggest change sat farther up the mountain, where the old mine entrance had been fenced off the previous summer. Now it was open. A new attraction sign had gone up in blocky red letters. The mine drop. The opening had been reinforced with thick support beams and decorative lanterns, as if that could make it welcoming. The ride was simple enough in concept. Visitors would step onto a heavy industrial elevator and descend 1,000 feet into the old mine shaft in near darkness, then rise slowly back to the surface. That was the official version. The unofficial version spread among staff before noon on my first day back. No one who worked at the park would test it. Management offered cash bonuses. Nobody volunteered. The maintenance crew said the cables whined strangely on the way down. One operator claimed the elevator sometimes stopped for a second in the shaft, even when no stop was programmed. Another said you could hear knocking from behind the rock when it reached the bottom. I laughed at those stories too, less convincingly than I used to. They never opened the ride to the public. That much is true. What I heard later was that they brought in outsiders to test it after hours. Men from a shelter in the nearest city, paid enough to say yes, and not enough to matter when things went wrong. I wasn't there when it happened. Most of us weren't. The story arrived in pieces over the next few days, spoken quietly in break rooms and beside vending machines. and while sweeping up popcorn near closing. The elevator went down. Then something failed on the way back up. There were no survivors. Management sealed the shaft and pretended the attraction was delayed for technical revisions. The sign stayed up for weeks. Red letters smiling over a path no one walked anymore. That should have been enough to make people leave. Some did. Most didn't. By then, Thriller World had its own gravity. The staff housing, the free passes, the pay envelopes on Fridays, the stupid little routines people build around summer. We stayed because staying one more week felt easier than tearing your whole life in half. And because the strange things didn't happen all at once. They arrived slowly. Between normal shifts, a boy came out of the rapids shivering and insisted someone had gripped his ankle underwater. A woman fainted at the carousel and woke up insisting she'd heard singing from beneath it. 3 children got lost in the haunted house. In 1 month alone, all of them were eventually found in the mirror room in the basement, crying and unable to explain where they'd been. One little girl kept saying she thought the house had changed its mind. People laughed that one off. I didn't. There was something about the haunted house that summer. It had always been one of the park's most popular attractions. A fake old mansion with creaking floors, velvet wallpaper, hidden corridors, moving panels, and actors who jumped out when the timing worked. It was cheesy during the day and unsettling at night, especially once the lines died down and the room stood empty between groups. Employees used it after closing because teenagers are drawn to places they shouldn't be. We'd go up to the attic sometimes with drinks and sit among old props and costume racks, listening to the muffled sounds of the park shutting down around us. The attic was my least favourite place in Thriller World. It was huge and dusty and too warm even after sunset. The beams overhead disappeared into shadow. There were trunks stacked against the far wall that nobody ever opened in front of me. The whole room had that dense, crowded feeling some places get, where you become aware of the air touching your skin, like being watched by a room itself. One Wednesday in late August, I ended up there again, with 5 others after a rough shift. A kid had nearly drowned in the wave pool. I'd gotten to him in time, but only just. When I pulled him out, he clung to me so hard, he left crescent bruises on my arms. He was maybe 9. Blue lips, trembling all over. When he finally managed to speak, he whispered, "There were hands down there." I asked him what he meant. He only shook his head and started crying. That night, I went up to the haunted house attic because I didn't want to go home with that sentence still echoing in my ears. We sat in a rough circle, passing a bottle, talking about nothing. Somebody complained about Randall Phelps. Somebody else talked about quitting after Labor Day. Jill, one of the younger lifeguards, kept laughing too loudly at things that weren't especially funny. Every now and then, I caught her glancing toward the darker corner of the attic, as if she thought she'd heard someone else up there. Eventually, the power cut. The whole house dropped into blackness. No one moved at first. Then someone swore, and another person laughed nervously, and chairs scraped as we all stood. The mansion began making all its usual sounds at once. Settling wood, a low mechanical groan from somewhere in the walls, the soft clink of dangling props shifting, only without the lights. It no longer felt staged. We made our way toward the stairs, using a flashlight someone had in their bag. Halfway down, The corridor that should have led to the front entrance opened instead into a narrow hall lined with old portraits. One of the games girls said we'd taken the wrong turn. One of the maintenance boys insisted we hadn't. We ended up in the basement. Nobody was drunk enough to find that funny. The basement of the haunted house was built around the mirror room, where dozens of angled panels reflected your flashlight into fragments and turned 6 people into 60. We must have circled 3 times before finding the hidden door that led back upstairs. Everyone was tense by then. Jill was somewhere behind me at one point. Then she was beside me. Then, I thought, ahead of me. When we got out, the night air felt like surfacing from deep water. We all went home. The next morning, Jill's mother called the park, asking why her daughter hadn't come back from work. I remember the exact feeling that moved through me then. Cold, quick, unmistakable. We gathered near the staff lockers and tried to piece together the night. We all remembered the attic, the outage, the basement, the way out. No one remembered seeing Jill leave. One of us said we needed to tell management everything. Another said maybe she'd gone home with someone. Another suggested checking the house quietly before making it official. We never got the chance. An hour later, the screaming started at Thriller House. A family had found their way into the upper level. Something gave way in the attic floor. Then another section collapsed. Then another. By the time I got there, people were pouring out of the front entrance covered in plaster dust, crying and shouting over one another. Somewhere inside, wood kept cracking in slow, terrible bursts. Rescue crews went in. Then a fire started. The rest of that day exists in my head like a fever. Smoke against the afternoon sky. Sirens swallowed by shouting. Guests clustered behind barriers with ice cream still in their hands, staring as if they were watching part of the entertainment. The smell of burning paint. The mountain looming behind it all. Quiet and old and indifferent. They found Jill in the basement. That's all I'll say. After that, Thriller World was finished whether management admitted it or not. Lawsuits piled up. Inspectors arrived. The press circled. The park closed before the next season and never reopened. For years, that was the version I told myself. Bad owners, cheap construction, faulty wiring, negligence, pride. There was plenty of truth in all of that. Then I started reading about the land. Maybe I needed a shape for what had happened. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that there was nothing there beyond the ordinary cruelty of men who valued profit over lives. I searched old newspapers, local records, whatever I could get my hands on. The ski resort on that same mountain had its own history of strange deaths. Electrocutions on the lift, catastrophic falls, accidents that were difficult to explain cleanly. Before that came the mine. That took longer to untangle. The official story said it closed after a cave-in. The quieter version said there'd been labour trouble. 12 miners leading talks against the Phelps family. A late meeting arranged underground. Then a collapse in the section where those 12 men had been told to gather. None of the Phelps family went down that night. All 12 men died. The reports on the bodies were sparse, buried, incomplete. Still, one detail kept resurfacing in different wording across different pages and interviews and half-erased records. The injuries were severe. The bones were crushed. The bodies had been broken down. I stopped reading for a long time after that. Even now, I don't know what I believe exactly. Maybe the mountain remembers. Maybe certain places hold on to violence, the way old houses hold on to smoke. Maybe Thriller World was built on something that had already learned how to hurt people. And every new ride, every cable, every current, every hidden wall simply gave it another way to reach up. I'm an old man now, compared to the boy who first climbed into that lifeguard chair. The park is gone. The signs are gone. Nature swallowed the parking lot years ago. If you drive out that way now, you'll find weeds growing through the old access road and trees pressing in around the remains. Once, about 10 years ago, I went back. I don't know why. The wave pool was a cracked bowl full of rainwater and leaves. The carousel canopy had collapsed in on itself. The path to the haunted house was barely visible. I didn't go near it. I stood there for a while in the cold evening light, listening. No music, no voices. Just wind in the grass and the mountain behind everything. And then, from somewhere higher up, somewhere near where the mine road used to begin, I heard the thin, metallic rattle of something moving for a second, and then falling still. It could have been anything. Loose debris, a branch, an animal. I left before I had time to talk myself into a different answer. And that's the thing people don't understand about places like that. They expect the fear to live in the worst moment, in the collapse, in the scream, in the body count. It doesn't. The real fear settles into the quieter things. A flicker in the light. A child saying there were hands in the water. A room that feels occupied when it isn't. An old mountain with a buried history. And a summer park built over its mouth. Painted in cheerful colours. Inviting families in. For a long time, I thought Thriller World had ruined amusement parks for me. It didn't. What it ruined was that particular kind of innocence. The kind that lets you believe a place is exactly what it claims to be. I still remember the park at dusk sometimes. The lanterns coming on. The rides glowing against the darkening sky. The smell of sugar and chlorine. The sound of laughter carried over water. It would almost be a nice memory. If I didn't know what was waiting underneath,